seems the world of sim racing has become enamored with online head-to-head competition. The development of artificial intelligence, or AI, really stalled out in the mid-2000s as sims became more and more focused on online racing. But although this is the focus, I know there's plenty of you out there that like racing AI just as much as I do. Maybe it's to practice, maybe it's just to watch cars go around the track from the replay view, but having good AI with your favorite tracks and favorite cars isn't always the easiest thing. Assetto Corsa itself is not known for its AI. In fact, it's known for kind of having poor AI in a lot of circumstances. But I've done a lot of tweaking and my own self-discovery over the past couple of years, and I wanted to share, at least in a quick, somewhat tutorial, what I've found in making good AI, or at least as good as AI can get in Assetto Corsa. This tutorial is going to talk about specifically what I've learned in making good AI or fun raceable AI, especially in vintage cars and on tracks that maybe have a lot of obstacles and things. What I cover here might be generally useful for all types of cars. I'll try to sprinkle in what I know, but since vintage cars is mainly what I race, I'm going to stick to what I know. Also not going to be a comprehensive tutorial. I'll try to cover what I do cover from end to end, but there's so much good stuff out there and other videos and write-ups and everything on AI. This is just going to cover some of the key things that I know go into making fun, raceable AI. To start things out, we need to change one setting to enable developer apps so that we have access to the AI applications when we're in Assetto Corsa. So if we come into the main Assetto Corsa directory, this should be within your Steam directory, common Assetto Corsa. Hopefully you know how to get there. Within this directory though, if we go to the system folder and then the CFG folder, this is where your Assetto Corsa INI file lives. You can go ahead and open this file in any type of text editor. Notepad will do. Within here, if you scroll down or search and find AC apps, it's right near the top usually, there should be an option to enable dev apps, and you want to set that to 1. This actually turns on a whole bunch of extra apps, but specifically the ones that allow you to make your own AI lines. So set that to 1 and save this file, and we'll be on our way. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I thought I'd pick something pretty easy. I've got one of the DLC Porsche 718 Spiders and the Monza 1966 track that's included with Assetto Corsa. I've chosen the junior course, so it's nice and short. This brings up one of the most important things with AI creation in Assetto Corsa. It's highly card dependent, so the car that you choose to make the AI with is not the only car that could be driven by the AI on that circuit, but it's going to carry some of the qualities of that car, or the driving style, if you will, of that car. It's the reason why many of the circuits that are included with Assetto Corsa don't work quite as well with the vintage cars, because they were driven or built with modern cars in mind, modern downforce, modern brakes, modern tire grip, and things like that. So one of my biggest tips, if you want the very best AI possible, you should record the AI line, what we're about to do, in a car that has a similar driving style, if not the very same car that you intend to race the AI with. You might have success recording AI lines with the old Formula 1 cars and then transitioning to GT cars, but if you try to record AI lines with a modern GT3 and expect the 60s Formula 1 cars to be able to race those, you're going to have a lot of difficulty. Alright, so I've set up a simple testing session, practice session. You want to be the only car on track to do this. So set yourself up a practice and come to the circuit in your car. I'm at the start finish line here, and we'll go over to the applications. Because I'm using Content Manager, they're on the side of the screen. If you're using stock Assetto Corsa, I think they'll be at the bottom. But if you enable apps, we scroll all the way down to developer apps, you should now see this developer apps section and the AI app specifically. So if you turn that on, that'll be what we'll use to start. The AI app at first can look a bit intimidating, but it's actually quite easy to use, at least what we're going to use it for. There's a lot more options here than we really need to record some AI lines. But you will have seen on the track that popped in front of us some really thin colored lines. These are the AI lines and track boundaries and things as they exist today. So we'll go through quick definitions on these. The pink line that you're seeing in front of you is what's called the fast line for the AI. This is the line the AI take, or the one they try to take as they're trying to go around the circuit. It marks the fastest line on the circuit, and it's also the most important one to make sure is correct. The red lines actually come to us from the track model itself. It's the outer bounds of the track surface itself, the raceable area, I guess you'd call it. We'll actually look at something in a bit where we can restrict that further, but this is really where you wouldn't want to go if you're driving the car, if you're the AI. You also see a teal line, and that's the pit line. A lot like the fast line, it gives the AI some direction as to how to get in and out of the pits. If you see yellow lines as well, we'll be looking at those later. Those are side lines or border lines. They mark not necessarily the edge of the track, but where the AI should maybe start thinking about getting back to the racing line. So to start things off, and really the most important line to create, make sure is created accurately, is this pink line, the fast line, the main one that the AI use. So if we go start driving away, we'll start on a lap here. The AI line, the fast line, and all of the different lines we'll be looking at today are built by driving the circuit. So one of the hardest things about building AI lines or making sure you make good AI lines is that you actually need to be able to drive AI lines. Now, the good news is only one of these lines needs to be driven as if you were racing, but it is the first one that we're going to look at, the fast line, the pink line that we're seeing here. Again, the one that the AI is going to try to follow, the one that if there was no other cars around that they would be on all the time. This is the route the AI take. So to build this, I'm going down the back straightaway here now at Monza Junior. What you want to do is click this Start Recording button. What that's going to do is start recording how you travel on the circuit as the fast line. And don't worry, nothing's being overwritten right away. You're going to have to actually change some file names and save things once we think we're in a good spot. But as we're driving now, the game is recording the position my car is on the track, as well as things like my steering input angle, my pedals, how smooth I am. And it's going to use all of that to calculate or tell the AI where they could go and how they could drive their car on the circuit. Alright, and so we're coming to the line with the recording button on, and we're going to record our fast line. You want to drive this line as if you're racing, but you want to be so smooth with it, maybe a lot smoother than you would normally be driving. You want to make very precise movements. Don't jump on and off the pedals too much. Don't jerk the wheel around. You don't need to be the fastest driver in the world, but you want to make sure you take the absolute perfect line that you'd want the AI always to take, and you don't want to move the wheel too much, shake things around, because anything that you do, the AI is going to copy and do probably tenfold. This lap is not going to be good enough. Find myself needing to do sometimes 10, 15 laps, 20 laps, get the tires up to temperature as if I'm practicing for a race, but just try to be smooth. Being smooth is the most important thing. You don't want to jump onto any random parts of the circuit. I don't want to slide the car into corners like that. That would be an awful line for the AI to take. You'd have them spinning out lap after lap going into the parabolica there if you did that. So it's all about figuring out, okay, if I want to race the AI, I want them to race on the same line I would, but I want to make it the perfect lap. All right, so we'll come to the line here and try another lap, nice and smooth, come across the line and brake firmly right at the third hay bale. Nice and easy down, want a bit wider of an arc than I did last time through here. But cut it close on the exit. There we go. Just tipped the wheel off. That might not be good, but we can see nice half throttle here through the S's. On the brakes again for the second turn onto the back straightaway. Once again, dipping a wheel a bit, but that might be an okay line. The steering wheel, I held it pretty steady through all of it. We'll go down the back straightaway here. I don't want to get too close to the grass, but don't want to be too far away either. Definitely not the middle of the track or anything, but leave maybe slight distance to the left there, and then we'll come down to the parabolica. This one's so tricky just to get absolutely perfect. We'll get it down to third gear, a bit slow on the entry, but again, it's not necessarily the pace we're going for. We just want to be nice and smooth, make sure we run a line that fits this car, a line that's going to work well, a bit wide on the exit, but not too bad overall. We'll get it up to fifth gear and flat to the line, and I think this is going to be, at least for the purposes of this tutorial, my line. I don't think this one's going to be perfect enough at all. It takes a lot of practice. This is not driving like you normally would in sim racing at all. It's kind of a different skill, and I think one of the reasons why it's not easy to make good AI lines. But that one was smooth enough. There's definitely no jerky movements with the wheel or anything that'll be bad. Maybe in this area, cutting the grass and stuff's going to be a little questionable, but we'll see what it looks like with the AI. So, like I said, really important thing. Once you get the line, once you turn the lap where you think that's good enough, you cannot start another lap, because as soon as you start another lap, it's going to delete the one you just did. So if you feel good about it, or at least you want to try it before coming back and doing more, you need to exit the sim right now to save it. Oh, and you might notice the Save AI button on the app itself, and that's actually for some of the settings here which pertain to how the AI drive this specific car. So saving this won't actually save the line that we just ran, just in case you try that button. So once we've recorded our line and exited, it might actually take slightly longer to exit than usual because it's actually saving the line that you recorded. But we need to go to the track directory to see our files and change out the line we just recorded with the one that was in there. So however you want to get to your track directory, if you're using Content Manager like I am, you can go to the Manage Track screen and then open up the folder right here. But it's just in your tracks directory and then whatever the name of the track is that you were editing. This track has multiple layouts, which is why we're seeing all these different folders here. The OSRW ones are special ones that I have, but we're editing the junior layout for this one. So double click in there and you should see at least a couple folders here. It's going to depend on how much of the track itself is unpacked. But for this layout, we've got an AI folder and a data folder. We'll be using both of these. But if we jump into the AI folder, this is where the lines that we just recorded are stored. So you'll see here that we've got a fastlane.ai. This is the line file that existed before we started recording. Then we've got fastlane.ai.candidate. This is the one that we just recorded. The date itself should be exactly when you stopped recording it. You also notice we've got our pit lane AI and also a pit lane candidate, even though we didn't record the pit lane yet. So it's always going to spit out candidate files for both of these, even if you didn't record both of them. But the one you didn't record, you can simply delete the candidate file. So I'll delete that. We'll come back to it in a minute. And then if I want to swap out my AI line from the existing one to my new one, what I would recommend doing first is renaming the fastlane.ai to something else. We'll call that _old, and then taking the candidate extension off. So now that I've swapped the names out, my .ai file that I just recorded is going to be the one in use. But if we ever want to revert back to the original, I can simply change the naming back to the way it was. So now you want to see if your AI line is working correctly. So set up a quick weekend practice session so that we can add an AI car. So I set up a 90-minute practice with one 718 Spider like I've got here. I usually run them on 97% strength. You don't want to go too low with the strength. You'll find the AI actually drive poorly if their strength is too low, and they'll drive better the higher it is. I've also removed any variation in the AI strength. You can use these sliders here to control some variance. So when you're actually racing AI, they're not always the exact same strength. But for this testing, we want to make sure things are consistent. So we'll change our strength to 97%. And then the aggression, I always keep around 30% for vintage type cars. You don't want to go too low with that either, or else, especially around other cars, they'll be overly shy and start crashing trying to avoid each other. And if you go too high, of course, they're going to crash into each other. So now that we're in our practice session here, you can just click on the other driver to take a look at their car. And what we're going to do is watch them do some laps around the circuit. Now, I've still got the AI app open, so you're going to see the lines on the screen based on where that AI thinks they're going to be driving. But one of the cool features of this is it actually is going to show you where they think they should drive or where they're thinking of trying to drive. All right, so he's exiting the pits, and we can see, hopefully you can see it on the video, he's following the teal line right now, the pit line, which will come back. I'll show you how to record that in a second. And you can see the yellow line in front of him. That's where he's trying to drive his car. You might notice as he comes out of the pits that he's going to have a tough time finding the racing line. He actually did an okay job there. That'll be due to the pit line that you've made not lining up directly with the AI line that you've had. And I'll show you how to fix that in a second. So if they stop as they're exiting the pits, that's totally fixable. But he was actually able to jump to our new line pretty good. Now I can see him trying to follow the new line. And so far, so good. The things I look for in this is, are the AI using too much of the track? Are they running wide? Are they hitting curbs? Are they hitting anything? I try to get my AI to be as smooth as possible. I saw there, he was on the brakes quite early. We can fix that a bit, but nothing is going to replace a good, solid AI fast lane like we have here. We'll see as he comes across the line. I'm particularly interested in the first sector here since it's the most complicated part of this track. Slowing down quite early, but I'll show you how you can fix that in a second. He's coming through. He's not really going off the track. He clips it a little bit there, which is expected. It's going to come through a little bit wide through that second apex. That might be an area where you say, I want to redo the line because I want to make sure they get nice and close to the apex. But all in all, he's not crashing or anything. He's getting around the track all right. He's slowing down a little too much in some spots, but I'll say that this one is good enough. If they're driving around and you think that they're not taking the right line, you can kind of repeat what we already did. Go enter a practice session, record a new line, save it as the main file and then come back in and watch them again. It's unfortunately a pretty time-consuming process, but once you get the hang of it, you'll know as you're driving the line if it's going to be good or not. Alright, so we're back in the sim. It's been a success so far, and actually, our AI was able to exit the pits just fine. But if you're having trouble with the AI exiting the pits, or you need to record a new pit lane, or if they're having trouble getting into the pits, you need to record a new pit lane or a pit line for them to be able to find their way from the racing line to the pits and vice versa. And that's really easy to do. And luckily, from here on out, you don't actually have to be a good racing driver to do any of this part, because you can drive this as fast or as slow as you want to. But the pit lane is pretty easy to record. You actually just do it by driving that line itself, and I'll give you a couple tips for how to do it. But I'm on the back straightaway at our little Monza Junior layout, and what you want to do is start the pit entry quite far ahead of where the pits actually are, kind of as early as you can, or at least a couple corners before the cars would need to exit towards the pits. You don't want to have them jump at the last second away from the pit line. And the best way to do this is to start driving and drive on the fast lane that you've recorded. And again, we don't have to do this with any kind of speed, so I'm going to go very slow. And you can see I'm actually in third person view on my car here, because we don't need to do this in any kind of realism mode. But you want to think about a little bit, keeping it realistic. When would you dive towards the pit lane, or when would you start thinking about diving towards the pit lane? And start recording your pit line before that. So we can see here coming up towards the Parabolica is the teal line, which is my existing pit line. And so in our AI app, we have the option to start our pit line. And we want to click that basically exactly where we want the pit line for the AI to begin, when they would first earliest consider diving towards the pit lane. And so I'll do that pretty much where my one was before. But again, this is about a corner before you would go into the pits. And we'll start it here. Alright, you can see on the box it says it's recording. Now I just want to follow my racing line definitely into this corner. At this point you wouldn't be doing anything different if you were going to be coming to the pits. It's only going to be on the exit of the Parabolica. And you can see my old pit line was lined up more with the existing AI line, so it's deviating. But I just want to stay directly on my pink line here and drive into the Parabolica nice and smooth. And now, as we're coming through the corner, I still want to stick on my line, but as we're exiting, this is when you can start taking the pit entry line. The AI, by this point, we've driven the racing line for a sufficient distance. They should be able to have time to consider jumping to the pits. And now I'm going to start diving a bit towards the inside. You don't want to be too drastic with this. You want to make it realistic. But if I was coming to the pits on this track, I definitely wouldn't fade out to the outside, especially when other cars are around. So I'd go nice and smooth and just keep the line smooth as we head towards the pits itself. Alright, so as we come towards the pits, you want to try to enter the pits and drive down the middle of the pit lane. You don't want to be in the left or the right lane. You want to straddle those. You cannot be too far away from the pit boxes, which we'll see on the right hand side here. If you're too far away, the AI won't even leave their stall because they can't find their way to the pit line. And I don't know the exact distance that they can go, but this pit lane is super narrow, so it's not going to be an issue. But on tracks that have wide pit lanes, I would always err towards being closer to the pit boxes than not. But definitely don't be against the guardrail, because they'll have trouble then. You also don't want to drive through the pit boxes at all, because then they're going to hit each other as they're trying to exit the pits. But you can see here the existing line, which pretty much following at this point, is quite close to the boxes. So you want to stay there too. We'll just drive through the pits and we'll exit. We won't stop in our stall at all. But we'll exit. We'll try not to get too close to the wall or anything. I don't want them hitting the wall as they exit. And then we'll follow a normal exit. So now that we're exiting the pit lane, we want to try to meet back up with our racing line at the point that you would want the AI to think about merging. And I don't know exactly how it works, but I think at some stage they consider, is that close enough for me to jump over? So we want to do something similar in reverse that we did with the AI line to come into the pits. We want to find a point that we think is a logical point for the AI to merge, and then follow our racing line for a good amount of time after that. And that will give them time to switch back to the racing line without having to make an abrupt jump. If you stop recording the pit line too early, the AI won't know when to jump to the line, or will make an abrupt stop as they try to find their way to the racing line. So now that I've joined up with the racing line again, I'm following the racing line. We met at the apex of turn 1. That maybe isn't the best place for AI to merge, but it's kind of the only place here, just bad track design. So we'll follow this over to the back straightaway, which is where the pit line ended last time. And again, there's no real maximum distance or minimum distance. You do not want to cross where your AI line for the pits began, though. So you definitely want to end well before it began. Otherwise, you can kind of go as long as you'd want. And I'll go to the start of the straightaway, which is where it went before. And again, trying to keep on, I'm not doing a best job here, but trying to keep on my fast line. So once you get to the end of it, you can just click the recording button to stop recording. And that has now recorded our pit line. So then we can exit the sim and we'll see it saved. All right, so now back in my AI directory, we have a bunch of files. We've got our original AI. We've got the one that we have been testing with and copied. We also have a new candidate fast lane, which we do not want because we didn't actually try to record the fast lane at all. And then we've got our pit lane AI line, which is the existing one. So I'm going to rename this one to _old. And then we've got our candidate AI line, which is the one that we just recorded. And we'll rename that one to be the active one. So now that we're back in the sim, and unfortunately there's no real quick way to do this, we just want to find our AI driver in practice mode here and wait for him to leave the pit lane and monitor his progress. What I'm looking for mostly is that he exits, he doesn't hit anything, the other cars or the walls, that he actually exits, he finds the AI line to exit. If you see them in place and they just turn their wheels and then sit there, that means they can't find their way to the AI line itself. But this one should be close enough that he'll jump over to it. And then importantly, I want to see him merge to the racing line without slowing down, without stopping, making any weird movements. You should just kind of flow onto it. You should almost not even notice that he's picked up the racing line and he continues on. Once he's done a full lap, you can be sure that they've exited the pits all right. All right, so he's exiting the pit lane. He was able to pull away, so we're good there. Now he's driving out. Everything looks good so far, nice and smooth, hasn't hit anything. And I'm just looking for him to now merge to the main line. And you will see the yellow line that he's following jump to the main line if we're lucky. It's really close here though, so you're not really going to see it, but he hasn't really stopped or done anything too weird just yet. And I can tell he's already on the racing line. So as far as I'm concerned, that's a pretty good exit, as good as it gets anyway in Assetto Corsa. Now, you would have to follow him around for the session and wait till he comes into the pits to see his entry line, which there's no way to determine how long that's going to be. But if you go out and do a practice session with the other AI and just enjoy yourself driving and then try to catch some of them coming into the pits, or let a session run, go check out a replay later, and you can verify that they can enter the pit lane. But I'm expecting with this line that I did, they should have no problem coming back in since we lined ourselves up with the racing line for a good long time. So now that we've got our main AI line recorded, I want to get another app that doesn't come with Assetto Corsa, but one that's, in my opinion, essential for making good AI. And this is called AI Line Helper by Assetto. It's at Race Department. I'll put the link in the description of the video. This app is very important to making sure that this works correctly or that you can create better AI overall. Once you download AI Line Helper, you can, I think, just drag and drop it onto Content Manager, or if you unzip it, inside it should have a pretty simple structure, just the apps and content folder. You can copy those and paste them in your main Assetto Corsa directory to get the app installed. AI Line Helper is going to help us do two things. It's going to help us set boundaries or sidelines for the AI to follow, make sure they don't leave too far the racing line. It's also going to help us get certain numbers that we need to add data to the AI hint file that we're going to do in a little bit. So it's a crucial app. Just set yourself up a practice session again, but this time when you load the sim and you click go, hold the shift button as it loads. Now, the reason I wanted you to hold the shift button on your keyboard as it loads is if there were already side lines built into the track, you would see them now. You would see yellow lines on the track. Holding shift as it loads is how you get those to appear. My track right now, we don't have any, but I'll show you what they look like in a couple minutes. But we're now back on the track. And if we go to our applications, again in the top right, if you haven't added this before, it should just show up in your apps since it's a custom app. You may have to scroll through to try to find it, but I've got it here, AI Line Helper. So if I click that, it'll open this tiny little app. So this app helps us set those boundary lines, and it's a really simple but amazing application. This is possible to do in parts. I think for a track this small or on most circuits, it's easy enough to do all in one go. But this is going to let us record the sidelines, and I'll explain a little bit more what those are. But we've got our track directory that it's going to be recording for, and then you've got this little number on the right, and that's where we are on the track from 0, which is the start line, to 1, which is the finish line. That's going to be important in a little bit. But what we want to do is start driving a lap. And then as you're driving a lap, once you've passed the start finish line, we'll start with the left side, but we'll hit track left. And you'll see this say start tracking left. So next time we come around the start finish line, it's actually going to start doing the tracking for us. So again, what we're about to do is set sidelines on the track. This is how far do we want the AI to drive before they say, hey, I got to get back to the fast line. I'm way out wide. And if you read documentation about this and some of the other tutorials that are out there, technically you should probably drive these right at the boundaries of the road, not over the red lines that we have here next to the road, but pretty close. My methodology though is, where I am right now, way out wide on the track, is somewhere the AI should never go. If I want them to race well, they shouldn't even think that's a possibility to race there. So I actually like to record the sidelines a bit closer to the actual racing line and give the AI a better concept of where racing should take place on the track, not necessarily where the track takes place. Now, there's a couple rules to keep in mind with this. You absolutely do not want to cross a red line. You do not want to cross the pink line. You don't even really want to get in them. So you want to stay with the left lane that we're going to record here now to the left of our pink line. And once we do the right one, you want to stay to the right of the pink line. But otherwise, I try to think about where is a logical place that I wouldn't want the AI to go past. Now, down this back straightaway, it's going to be right against the grass here, maybe slightly in the grass since my actual fast lane is close. But as long as my center line of my car is to the left of the pink line and I don't cross it, we should be all right. Same thing with going off the track. I don't really want to drive off the track, but just nipping the dirt just a little bit will be fine. All right, so we'll start coming to the start-finish line to record our left tracking lane, the sideline for the left side. It still says start tracking left, and as we cross the start finish line, you'll see it say tracking left, I believe. Like with the pit lane, we don't have to drive this at any speed, and I'd actually recommend driving this kind of slow so you can be precise, although driving it at some kind of speed so that you know what the limits are to the track isn't a bad idea either if you're having trouble with it. But you can see it's changed to tracking left, so we're now recording the line for the left side, the maximum bounds that I would want to race on with the AI. So as we come down to turn 1, I don't want to go all the way to the hay bales. You would never actually race there. I actually want to stick quite close to the pink line on turn in, so it wouldn't go much wider than this. Maybe sweep out a bit wide. Let's pretend we've got a car to the right of us. Sometimes it's best to pretend like you're going too wide through corners on the track. That was probably too wide there for my own liking, but we'll keep it for now. As I come to the second corner now, this one you would probably use some of the grass there, so I'll get on it a little bit. I don't really want to pass the red line, but keep it nice and tidy to the left side. As we come to this right-hander, then I don't want to go all the way out to the left there because you would never actually drive that type of line. But then let it feed out straight towards the grass. This would be your maximum outside if you were too wide. So it's all about envisioning what are the maximum bounds of racing to the left and to the right and driving those, leaving some space on the straightaway, of course, for passing, but then in the corners, I find it best to actually keep them quite tight, and that'll make sure that AI never venture out too far in either direction. They'll keep themselves between these lines that you draw here pretty accurately. Hit a big bump there, but it'll be all right. This one, you don't need to be super smooth with it. You also don't want it to be all zigzaggy, but we'll follow it down the back straightaway here. All right, and as we come down to the parabolica on entry, I'm just going to drive the outside of the groove rather than the outside of the track, which I think you probably wouldn't sway much more to the left here if you're having a decent time at it. Now, keep in mind the AI can technically get outside of this line. If they're pushed there or if they make a mistake, they will drive outside of this. So it's not necessarily the maximum that they could possibly go, but it's what they will try to go for. So unless something extra happens, they won't go beyond this. Coming out the parabolica, you would definitely be all the way to the left here if you're too wide or if you're carrying a lot of speed. And as we get on the straightaway, this is an area where you might want to open up the AI line a bit, let them think they can go a bit wider so that they can get side by side. There's no exact math with any of this, but if you're seeing some issues with the AI running too wide in corners or thinking they can squeeze a car in somewhere, you might consider tightening up these lines. So as we come now to the start-finish line, tracking left will stop once it gets to 1, and that line will be done being recorded. We'll cross the line and it will say the track name again. So now we're free. We don't actually have to exit the sim at this point, and we can click on our track right, which will say start tracking. And we just have to complete another lap, get back to the start-finish line, and we can start recording the right side. All right, so coming to the start finish line to record our right tracking line. Important, you want to try to make this match up lap after lap. So I'll keep in mind, I'm kind of to the inside of the boxes. You do want to make sure the full starting grid area is within these lines that we're recording. But now I'm tracking the right side, so I'm recording my right line. And you want to think about how shallow into this first corner would we really go. We just want to stay to the right of the red line and to the left of the pink line. But I think on an optimistic overtake, you would drive all the way down here, probably a little too wide there. Try to keep it nice and close. Want to make sure I don't cross that pink line. If you do, the AI will do all kinds of crazy things in the corner. We'll come to this left-hander though, and I won't drive all the way to the pavement there on the right side, because I don't think you'd ever do that if you were actually racing. We'll come up to this right-hander. I'll go a little slower so I make sure I don't cross my pink line. We'll have to check out if the AI do anything weird there, because I might have crossed it in the first apex. Now we'll come to the back straightaway, and this is where I wouldn't maybe drive super tight. The AI definitely would use, or racers I guess, would use the full width of the track here to try to do overtakes. So I'm going to stick to the maximum inside, so make some better racing too. The AI will be able to get past each other here. And if you're recording AI on an oval, it's actually very helpful, again, to run these at speed. Even though you don't have to, if you think about running the high line, running the low line on an oval, running these lines at speed will give you more accurate lines as to what an AI or what a racer would do as they're racing through the corners. So coming into the parabolica, I want to stick right against the curb. It's going to be tough to make sure I don't pass the pink line. I don't really want to get on the curb, but I was about as extreme as I can go there. Now we'll stick to the inside, but I want to think, at what point would you really not stick to the inside anymore if you were racing coming out of the parabolica? I don't want to go to the pits. And you can cross the pit line. You don't have to stay to the right of that, luckily. But now we'll come, and this is about the point where things will fade out and you would drive straight. Now, Monza's got a really wide front straightaway. I don't think you would ever see somebody racing right against the pit wall, but you would maybe see him about here. But I want to try to aim for where I started my line. I think I was right about here, maybe a little more to the left. It doesn't need to be perfect, but you don't want it to be a big jump or anything like that. So as we come to the start finish line, we'll see our tracking right change back to the track name, and we'll have finished our right lane as well. All right, so once that's done, you can exit the sim, and we'll take a look at what we did. All right, so we've completed recording our sidelines. Now, sidelines will actually make a CSV file when you generate them. And a lot of tracks don't come with these. This is actually one of the main things I do when I'm trying out a new track and the AI aren't cooperating. I'll record these sidelines. If you come to the track folder, so I'm in my Monza Junior track folder, we'll go to the data folder this time instead of AI. And within here, you should see a whole bunch of files, some of which are interesting, some not. But if we scroll down to the bottom here, side L and side R, these are the two files that we just made. You can see made one at 5:34 and 5:38 p.m. These are the sidelines that we just generated. If you want to make new ones, you might want to back these up first before you overwrite them. They're CSV files, so they're technically just a list of points. But let's see these in action. So if we jump back to Content Manager, and we're going to load up my practice session again with my AI driver. But when we're loading the sim, we'll hold the Shift button again. All right, so I'm back in the sim, and I'm just flying around in FreeCam. And hopefully you can see it because it's very faint. But we've got our red line now, which has moved. It's no longer right against the edge of the track. And we also have the yellow line. If you're not seeing the yellow line, maybe you can't see it in the video super well, but there's a yellow line here. If you're not seeing it in your sim, you either didn't record those lines, or you didn't hold the Shift key when the sim was loading. It doesn't show by default for some reason. If we scroll over or fly over here, we've got the pink line, which is our racing line. Then you should see another red line with the yellow line below it. So that's the maximum extent the AI are going to ride or drive or try to race each other. So we can see here through a corner like the first one, I think this is pretty good. It's nice and wide out coming in, but tightens up on the exit. I'm not riding right against the outside edge of the circuit here. And coming down into this corner too. I maybe could have kept the red line here, the yellow line on the left, right against the pavement there. That probably would be better, but I can see how the AI race, and if they're not passing each other enough, or if they're kind of brake checking each other, trying to get into single file here, you may consider re-recording those to widen it up a bit. There's a lot of testing that goes into AI. It's not something that you can really do quick, but if you do it enough, you will recognize what you need to do to make it competitive right out of the gate. All right, so I'm just following my AI driver here in practice as he drives around the track. And what I'm looking for is making sure he's not brake checking or doing anything anywhere. This might be the point where you want to throw a few AI on the track and see how they race around each other, see if they are able to pass or anything like that. But I'm trying to also see if any of my lines are conflicting with each other. If you crossed the pink line with one of the side lines, you will see them brake check or do crazy maneuver to try to avoid what they think is a wall, I would guess. So you may want to re-record the line then to fix it, make sure nothing crosses over each other. But it's all a balancing act, trying to get the fast line to be a good racing line, and then those side lines to give you a good maximum area to race in. As you're watching the AI, this will lead into the last part of things and making an AI hints file. The hints file can help smooth out areas, and I'm watching them come down into turn one, and they're braking really hard. He's braking almost to a stop well before the corner, and then he's accelerating. So he thinks the corner is not going to be wide enough for him to go in at a good speed, so he's kind of slowing the car down. There's a lot of different ways to fix things like this, both in editing some of the car files as well as editing track properties, but there's a file or a system called AI Hints that we can use that's built specifically to address this. All right, so the AI hints file. This file, like I said, is going to be a way for us to tweak the AI further. We have a bunch of options within this, and I'm only going to go through some of the basics here to fix the problem that we're seeing, which is one I see all the time. The AI are either going too fast into a corner, even though we've tried to record the proper line, or they're going too slow in the corner, brake checking themselves, things like this. So the AI hints file is how we can override their thought process. Back in your data folder, in the track folder, so I'm in my Monza, I'm in my layout folder for the junior layout, and then I'm in data, we need to make a new file. So if you add just a text file in Windows, we can call this AI, and this is important that you get it right, AI_hints. Instead of .txt, we'll call it .ini. And hit save, and it'll ask us if we want to change the extension. That's fine. So the AI hints.ini file, this is the file we'll use to add some hints. It's a good name for it. It's going to tell the AI what to do or what they can do, maybe differently than they think they can on certain parts of the track. So you can open this up in any kind of text editor itself. I'll open it in Notepad, and it will be blank to start. And what we're actually going to do at the same time is start ourselves a practice session just alone so that we can go take a look at a few data points. All right, so we're back on the track here, and why we opened up the sim is we do need to get some important information about where we want the AI to do whatever we want them to do. And the easiest way to do that is to use our AI line app that we were just using to record the sidelines, but we're not going to be recording anything here. We're going to pay attention to the number. So if we drive away and drive to the area on the track, that's our problem spot. You want to take note of the number that's being recorded here. You can see, again, it's going to be 0 at the start line and 1 at the finish line. So it's going to be somewhere between 0 and 1. And we want to fix this first corner, make them drive a bit quicker through it. So we want to take a look at where the AI may start to brake, which I think is going to be about here. And we'll stop the car. So we're right at about 0.052. So we'll open back up our text file. And if you've got Assetto Corsa in windowed mode, hopefully that's easy for you. And so there's a lot of different parameters and things that you can enter in the AI hints file. I'll give you a quick rundown. You can add the hints, which is what we're going to add, which tells them they can go faster or slower into a corner than they think they can. You can also add brake hints into a corner, which can adjust their braking further. We may get into that if this first fix doesn't fix it. There's also the ability to add danger areas to the track as well. So let's say there's a chicane or some walls really close to the track. You can add some extra danger markers for them to be extra careful. I'll link in the description a forum topic that discusses more of these parameters. It's also worth checking out some other tracks that you have from good creators, like Fat Alfie for one. I know they always include this type of file that has some good examples on how this works, but they all roughly work the same. For a hint, we're going to add our first hint. So we'll add in brackets hint 0, and you'll number these if you add more than one. They need to be in the order they are in the track too. So if we happen to add something else before hint 0, we'll renumber that to 0, but it would go 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. And then we'll pick a starting point for our hint. So the starting point for this one is going to be that decimal that we just saw as we were recording it. So it's going to be that 0.052231. You can get less specific with this. I actually normally do it to 3 characters. And you may want to adjust it to be slightly earlier or slightly later. But for something like a hint, we want it to take up everywhere from the entry to the apex, and maybe a little bit past the apex of the corner. So our start line, our starting point for this hint is going to be at that 0.052. We'll then also put a placeholder for our end value, although we don't know it yet. And then the last parameter is going to be the value itself. So the value is how different should they enter the corner. You almost think of it like a strength percentage. It goes from 1.00 would be drive the corner as you do now. If you go over this, like 1.5, which would be pretty extreme, but that means drive that corner 1.5 faster. So 50% faster than you were driving it before. If you change this to 0.5, that would be drive it half as fast as you were driving it before. So this is how you can adjust how fast they should drive through the corner. So as a starting point, I'd say we can try something like 1.3 and see if we can give them a bit more gusto. Back in the sim now, we just want to drive to find what point this hint would stop. We don't want them to drive the whole track as if they're driving it at 1.3, but how far should we let them drive thinking they can go a bit further? And in my opinion, for an entry fix where we want them to go a bit deeper into the corner, we should probably go to a little bit past the apex. Then they can pick the racing line back up in the normal percentage. So maybe about here might be good as a starting point. So 0.130. So we'll add that to the file. So we're going to have them start at 0.0520. We'll have them drive to 0.130 at 1.3 their pace. So if we save this file now, we have an AI hints file. We'll exit the sim and reload it in a practice session. All right, so we're back in the sim and I'm watching one of the AI cars come down to the first corner and interested to see if he just totally misses the corner, in which case we gave him too much optimism, or if there's still brake checking, in which case we might need to try something slightly different. But he'll come down, still slamming on the brakes quite a bit, quite a lot early, but he's a bit quicker, but I bet we'll see he'll understeer now. Yeah, he's running a bit wide because he thinks the corner's faster than it is. So the hint itself wasn't what we want to fix this specific issue. We'll take a look at the brake hint here in a second, but you can see that he understeered around the apex, so he thought he could go quicker in that corner than he actually could. I'm going to copy out our configuration for this because we essentially want it to happen at nearly the same point, but we're going to add in a copy of what we had and change the name from just hint to brake hint. This is a separate type of hint. You don't need to use it in conjunction with the normal hint itself, but brake hint tells the AI driver that they need to hit their brake pedal harder or softer depending on what we tell them to do here. So I'm going to leave it at the same area from 0.052 to 0.130, since that's the same range that we want it to happen. And then the value itself here is going to tell them how hard to press the pedal. So if we left it at 1, they would do the exact same thing that they're doing now and braking just as hard. But I want them to actually brake less than they are now. So I'll put this down to 0.8, I believe. We'll test that out and see what it's like. All right, so I've gotten the AI to take the entry into turn 1 a bit better, but it's still not perfect. And I actually tweaked around with the AI hints file for a little bit, but then ended up re-recording the fast line. So there's just a lot of tweaking involved to get things right, but you can use all these different things to your aid. The hints file itself is not going to be a be-all, end-all fix for this type of issue. And you may find yourself having to re-record fast lines all over again, but it's possible to make it a bit better, and especially using some of the other features like danger or the corner radius and things, you can help improve the AI overall. So at a basic level, those are some of the different things that I change to try to make AI work a bit better at a track. You can see why it's pretty car dependent, or at least style of driving dependent, and why recording AI lines with a GT3 car is just not going to work out with a Formula car. Your braking zones, your entry, your lines, most of all, are going to be different in those types of cars. And Assetto Corsa, unfortunately, doesn't support multiple AI lines on a given track like rFactor 2 actually does, based off different type of cars, although I haven't seen too many different developers utilize that. So I hope this helps some of you with some of the basics in getting custom AI set up for some of the tracks. It's really not that hard to improve parts of this, and it's not often you have to do all of these things. One of the main things I see missing from tracks, like I said earlier, are those sidelines. So if you go and record some of those typically, or check the data folder for the track that you're racing on, see if it has those and record them. They can make a world of a difference in keeping the AI on the track if you're having difficulty with them. But if you notice the AI braking in weird spots or just generally taking the wrong line, it's best to try to re-record that fast line and maybe then add an AI hints file to adjust it. So a quick one, but hopefully a useful one. If you've got any tips as well, please feel free to share them. Always interested in learning a bit more, but I do hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching though. This is GP Laps, and I'll see you all again next time.